just like any other car on the road, the new Edge Mustangs are prone to being destroyed, whether it's through an accident or the driver's fault, getting flipped over or raced, things like that happen, and we're very well aware of that. But the thing is, these cars are now getting older, and when they get older, there's a couple things that happen. They get more affordable, so younger people are getting their hands on them, and less experienced drivers like them are driving them around and wrecking them. Sometimes it's a matter of them not being able to handle the power of a car like that. Sometimes they get hit by somebody else. There's all sorts of reasons why these cars get totaled, and being in a major community on Instagram, I've seen a lot of these cars, especially Mach 1s, Cobras, Bullets, get wrecked. And I've seen a lot of people say, oh, I hit standing water, or, this happened, that happened. Whatever the reason, there are situations where these cars are destroyed. And when I mean destroyed, I mean they're not fixable. I remember watching this video on YouTube of this blue Mach 1 here, that the car got flipped end over end. He was going 90. He crashed into a driveway is what it said. Flipped the car over, just totally destroyed it. He was lucky to be alive. And he went on to buy another one just like it. And he raced, and in the video it shows him beating it all up and racing and stuff. And that's okay. These cars are meant to have fun and do donuts and race and do things with. But he got his hands on another one, and he drove it really hard, and then he ended up selling it. But you see these pictures on the internet of these cars that get totaled, and it really starts to hurt. So we know these cars are getting ruined, and that's just part of life, and that's going to happen with all makes and models, no matter whether it's Corvettes, Ferraris, Camaros, anything out there that's sporty. But there's another element that's really sad, and that's when the cars are getting destroyed for other reasons. For example, this Cobra was one that I saw down when I went to SEMA. It was driving around town, ripping through the streets, really awesome car. I saw it at the racetrack as well with my brother, and after a little while on Craigslist I noticed that the guy was parting it out, and I asked him if the car had been wrecked, and he said no, and I asked him some questions about what happened to it, and he didn't really want to say, but it turned out that he got behind on the payments, and he decided he was going to part the car out, just like in the other video that I had recently. This is Danny Johnson's Mach 1. I remember I went with him to get this car, and at the time the transmission had some shifting issues. The car wasn't in perfect shape, but the guy who sold it to us said that he really wanted Danny to get it because the other people had told him that they wanted to come get it to part it out. Even my own Bullet was an example of this. When I got my Bullet, the owner had told me that he had a few people come look at it and said that they thought that it would be a good car to sell the parts off of. Unfortunately, you also have situations like this beautiful blue Bullet where the guy decided he wants to return it to stock. He wants to get all the parts that he put into it back. It was a 4-valve swap, had a beautiful engine, and he knew that the car was worth more in parts, so he was going to just take everything off of it and sell it as a rolling shell. But what I think hurts the most for me is to see these cars, like this Bullet for example, that's on the Facebook parts pages where they say the car has a rod knock, it's got high miles, I'm going to part it out if nobody's going to take it for a decent amount of money. And you got these cars like these beautiful Terminator Cobras that could be repaired and kept as historic, wonderful cars, but people and companies part them out because the parts are worth more. Now, I understand that it's a business. I know people buy these cars to part them out. It's very well known that a car is worth more in individual parts than what it's worth as a whole. And there's a lot of times you can sell each individual piece, especially if it's a desirable car. But I think it's really sad to see these cars getting to this point where they're getting chopped up and parted out and sold. This Bullet, for example, was a car that was abandoned, probably because they couldn't pay for it. It was left in a field and the paint got ruined, but it only had 55,000 miles on it. And the people who bought it knew what it was, and they bought it even with a clear title. They decided to take all the parts off of it, make their money, and then try to sell it as a shell. And I saw this car on Instagram where the guy had bought it from a friend, and it wasn't exactly what he wanted. It was a salvage title, and he decided, It'd be better if I took it to a shop that I know who does this and just take all the parts off of it, sell it, and get my money out of it. But this one really, really hurts to see. And this is a zinc yellow Terminator, which is a beautiful car. Zinc yellow isn't as desirable as screaming yellow. It's a color that a lot of people seem to hate, and I don't really understand why. I know it's more pasty and flat than the screaming yellow, but still, it's an awesome car. It's loud, it stands out. It's a Terminator. It's a lot of things that are desirable. And I read this story on SVT Performance where a guy was selling it as a rolling shell, and he said, I bought this car because I wanted the drivetrain out of it for one of my project hot rod cars, and I had no problem doing this because it was zinc yellow. And a lot of people were on there like, yeah, good job, blah blah, yeah, zinc yellow sucks, and it was really sad to see that. I like zinc yellow. I would buy a zinc yellow Terminator just because of how many people hate them. But anyway, this is an example of where somebody had bought the car because they knew I could get the drivetrain out of that car and then sell it as a rolling shell and make my money and make it affordable. Now I've done things where I get cars and I buy them and I take some parts off of them and I return them to stock and sell them. But these other people just leave them as a rolling shell, and it's very unlikely that those cars are ever going to get put back together right. From a financial standpoint, it's just very unlikely that someone's going to buy the car and put money back into it just as the other person had taken away from it, unless they happen to have one that's wrecked or something and they have the access to the parts. Now, some of these cars that are worth a lot of money, like a competition orange Terminator for example, have been put away after they've been parted out, or in this case, this is a really cool story about this car. The guy had built it up as a turbo car, put a lot of money into it, and then he blew it up on the dyno, and so he just put it away. It had really low miles on it, and a guy had heard about it, and he had a competition orange Mach 1, and he decided he wanted a Terminator real bad. His Mach 1 was even Terminator swapped, but he still wanted a Terminator, so he went and found this car, luckily, and swapped everything into it. And this is a cool story because it's a car that, if it was a V6 or a GT or something of lesser value, it might not have survived. But he ended up putting it all back together, cleaning it up. He found an engine for it that was actually a no-mile crate engine, and he got the car running, and he owned it and enjoyed it for a while. He actually sold it, I believe, and it went overseas. Here's another competition orange Terminator that had the engine go in it, and the guy had sold it as a roller, but because the car was so desirable, it was saved, and somebody else bought it and put a new engine in it and everything. But some of these cars, because they're desirable, will survive. Like this Bullet here that's in someone's garage. They're slowly working on it. They're going to try to get it back up and running, but it might be a while. Here's another Mach 1 that I saw that they were selling as a rolling shell that will probably be alright. And this Terminator, there's cars like these out here that they're in pretty rough shape, but they're still on the road. And it is getting to a point where giving it a new paint job and everything becomes costly, and it might be parted out. Like this Bullet here, this car is kind of on the fence. It might be one that gets restored, or it might be one that's parted out. My friend's Cobra, like this one, it had a salvage title from being stolen, and he was lucky enough to get it, and he enjoyed it and loved it. Unfortunately, the engine blew up in it, and he ended up parting some of it out and then selling it as a rolling shell. So only history will find out where that car goes. But a lot of these cars like these are in Mexico, and that's where a lot of these cars go that get salvage titles. And they'll be down there, and they'll be enjoyed and loved and maybe restored and taken care of as well. But you got the barn finds, you got cars like these that are put away, and maybe they'll resurface. But there are a lot of them that are being restored, like this beautiful Bullet here. And the story of this Terminator here that was completely destroyed and left in a barn, and a guy had taken it and restored it. And here's another example of a car that was a salvage title. This is my friend's Terminator. It was stolen, and he bought it as a theft recovery on Copart. And he repainted it, had it all gone through, restored it. And it's a beautiful car to this day. And I mean, he could have just bought one that was in great shape that looked just like it, and by the time he got done spending everything it cost to put it back together, he very well could have. But I think it's neat that he saved the car. And so it makes me happy to see these cars that have been destroyed and see people who have put a lot of money and time into them, and especially people who are skilled laborers in the field, people who know how to do body work and paint. I like seeing these cars all put back together and restored, because some of them would be just crushed and forgotten. I hope we see people restoring these cars instead of parting them out and chopping them up in the future, and hopefully people will see the value in these and that they're becoming pretty rare. But anyway, thanks for watching. I thought these were some good thoughts to share, and I appreciate you checking out my channel.